All right, so first, within the front head locking system, what I think it's important to identify is some transitions between submissions that exist within the front head locking system. Unlike the Kimura system, where most of the submissions that are transferring to are submissions that are outside the system, as opposed to just different variations of Kimura. The front head locking system has quite a few different submissions involved in it, so it makes sense to be able to navigate between those before we start talking about navigating from that system to the next system. One of the important relationships to talk about when we're talking about transitioning between different front head locking submissions is the relationship between guillotines and katagatame. So we'll first talk about how as I'm going for various forms of katagatame, it opens up guillotines. Okay, my training partner is going to drop down to his elbows and his knees. Okay, every time I go to set up katagatame situations, and this could be inverted katagatame, which is known as the Dar strangle, okay, or it could be standard katagatame, which is the anaconda strangle. Okay, as I set any of these movements up or lock any of these movements in your knees, my training partner's response often results in the opening of elbows. Okay, now that's disruptive to finish the katagatame for sure. Okay, the more my training partner opens his elbows, the harder it is to knock him down, the more difficult it is to actually start to finish the strangle. Let's say he knocked down to his side. If I was going to try to lock in here and he starts opening up his arms, it's hard to connect my arms and really get the finish. But what this does do for us, and what opportunities this does create, is it creates opportunities to move to the guillotine with an unguarded neck. Okay? Basically what starts to happen is as his elbows separate from his body, okay, like so, the neck starts to open up and it's harder for him to defend my grips with his hands. Okay? Normally when he's in a turtle position, his hands are right here. They're ready to address the neck at any given point in time. When I start fighting for things like katagatame, he starts opening elbows and I can feel the hands drifting away from the neck. So now what I begin to do is rotate through and I catch my wrist past my training partner's clavicle and I catch my own wrist and I look to go to finish. Okay, with high elbow guillotines. All right, my training partner comes back up to his knees. Okay. Another way that we look to transition is from, like I said, standard katagatame. Okay. Now, typically we don't lock in standard katagatame while we're on our knees, but I could. Okay. I could try to lock in anaconda here. All right. If I did that, my training partner will often open up his elbows, which makes it so hard to finish, and then I can transfer into my high elbow. As I transfer into the high elbow, I grab my own wrist, where the watch would be, and I get the leg over the back. A more realistic transition, probably for katagatame, or standard katagatame, is one in which I roll through to trap my training partner's arm. So I roll, okay, and my training partner's top side arm is available to block with my knee and lock into that katagatame. Now, what are we going to see? More than likely, rotate, is as we try to do this, my training partner will fight to get this elbow open. The more he does this, the harder it is to close my elbows around the submission, and I can't really look to finish. Now, it's hard to punch in any submissions here for the guillotine, but what I can do is roll over my shoulders. Let's talk about rolling over the shoulders for a minute here. It's an important skill. Whenever I get caught in a situation where I'm going for inverted katagatame or standard, and I end up on my back and I want to follow the opponent, we want to do it in a particular way. If I try to bridge one way and my opponent tries to bridge the other, often it's the case that eventually he fights his arm out of here and he's able to turn away from me and get up to his knees. If my opponent bridges one way, and I also bridge the same way, you notice we're very easily able to come up to the knees and follow my opponent. Now, that doesn't have to be random, okay? Two things can occur. One, I can wait for the opponent to try to make his move. When he makes his move, I can go and roll. The problem with this is while he's doing that, while I'm waiting, he's probably going to be trying to strip grips off, taking hands away, etc., and this is going to cause me problems. And even if I follow him, I'm going to have bad results. So instead of waiting, one of my favorite ways to act in this situation is to start by bridging one way, and when my opponent resists, I go back the other. And as I go back, notice my training partner's hands are busy propping on the mat to keep his balance. I go right into my high elbow guillotine transition once again. Okay? We can do this once, again from Katagatame situations, all right, where I'm on my back, scooting over. Okay? As I try to perform the move, okay, my training partner opens up his elbow, and I have the head and the arm trapped like so. Okay? I initiate a bridge towards my opponent, and I get resistance. As I get resistance, I go with the motion that my training partner wants and come up to my knees. Right away, as I'm coming up to my knees, I punch my arm in, I lock against my wrist, and I get my leg high over my training partner's hip for the finish. So what you start to see is this relationship developing where my training partner's elbows move away from his neck and open up the guillotine as I come into these transitions. So a couple more things to add to the relationship between Katagatame and guillotine situations. Okay. The first is the idea of drawing my training partner's elbow across his body and setting up transitions where I go for a version of Katagatame that's quite different than some of the Katagatames that you've seen thus far. Okay. This is a Katagatame because my training partner's arm is across his neck right now. You can do this on the other side so you can see, as opposed to an arm-in guillotine or whatever the case may be. So from this position, all I really look to do, instead of guillotine-like finishes where I bring chin to chest, is I look to retract my elbow into my training partner's neck like so, all right, for the finish. While I'm doing this, it's very likely that my training partner tries to fight his arm out of this situation. So as I'm strangling, my training partner looks to try to remove the arm, and as he does so, there we can go into our guillotine transitions. Okay? Now, the other aspect that is important in this sort of transition to go from, in terms of the relationship between Katagatames and guillotines, is looking at things in the reverse. So if I'm trying to go for guillotines and my training partner starts bringing his hands in to start to protect, it makes it easier to perform my Katagatame transitions. Why? Because as his hands come in towards his neck, his elbows draw in, okay, which makes it easier to step off to the corner and transition to my Katagatame, or my inverted Katagatame situations where I knock my training partner down. Okay? Okay? And it makes it easier as my training partner starts to protect his neck once again to roll my training partner through as the elbows narrow so that we can start looking for regular Katagatame or standard Katagatame anaconda strangles. So I start going after the neck, and his hands start coming in, and I don't want my hands gripped because very quickly my training partner can start pulling his head out and getting completely out of front headlock. So as this happens, I just post on my opponent's elbow, I put my knee behind, and I lock into Darce strangle territory, okay, where I lock up, figure four, and I can start finishing by stepping around the corner. And then the full transition to anaconda will be that where I'm going for guillotine transitions. His arms start coming in. Okay, I just grab the back of my training partner's elbow. All right, I can either lock my hands or cup, and I roll my training partner through onto his side from here, starting to set up the anaconda strangle. Once again, focusing on locking up, elbow deep, getting our hand as high as possible, and hopefully stepping over to finish these strangles as tightly as possible. Okay, so now we see this relationship works in both ways. As I'm going for guillotines, my training partner draws elbows in. Katagatame transitions become easier. As I go for a Katagatame, my training partner opens the elbows up, and guillotine transitions start to become easier. We're going to take a look at an interesting concept within the front headlocking system. Now, I know most of what we're doing here is intended upon transitioning from one submission to the next, from system to system, but we are doing a little bit of work within each system to talk about like some of the submission holds that we can do there. We talked a little bit about the relationship between guillotines and Katagatame, and those are kind of the main submissions that we're going to see from these front headlocking situations. But let's take a look at what we're going to do in a front headlocking situation where my training partner tries to move around my body, whether it be because they roll to pressure, I try to sweep them, or my training partner tries to hop past my guard. Let's see some opportunities and options from there. All right, how we can play around with our front headlocking system from here. So if I see situations involving my training partner hopping past my guard, here's what I'm going to do. One of the main problems, one of the submissions that I want to switch to whenever this sort of thing starts to happen, when I'm trying to hit my high elbows and my training partner starts covering and moving to the side, is we often lock a figure 4 around my training partner's neck and walk towards the opponent, finishing the strangle. Okay, it's basically like a Dar strangle or an anaconda strangle with no arms on the inside. It's very different than the figure 4 from the guillotine type of submission because my training partner's off to the side like so. Okay, it's a really good transition, but I think sometimes when we're trying to hit it, okay, so I'm getting in this situation and falling, my training partner's shoulder gets a little bit in the way of the transfer during the submission hold. This is always going to be a risky transition because my training partner's passing my guard, but we're going to give it a shot. I'm going to take my knee and I'm going to press it into my training partner's rib cage to shoot him a little bit further through so that I can edge this arm in. So as I feel my training partner moving past my guard, I'm going to put my right foot on the floor, my left knee in my training partner's chest, and I'm going to slide my training partner over like so I can lock this figure 4 in place. If I don't do that, what I often find is that as I try to make my switch, my arm gets buried in my training partner's shoulder and I can't move it. So as my training partner tries to hop past my guard, I go knee to sternum, I push off the ground with my right foot, and I act like I'm going to try to sumigashi my training partner almost to my left side. He's probably going to stay upright, but now I punch my arms in place and I look to strangle. I literally just like bicep punched Chris in the throat when I did. But anyway, we're good. So, another way we could look to follow my training partner, aside from him looking to try to pass my guard, is my training partner rolling to avoid getting submitted. So, you don't have to do it yet. As I go into my high elbow transitions or low elbow guillotines, when my training partner starts to feel pressured, it's often the case that he starts falling over to a shoulder. All right, as my training partner falls over to a shoulder, the ideal situation is for me to keep my heel on his hip, and as he falls, I pull with my heel, and I follow the opponent. Okay? It's not always the case. Sometimes what you can do, if you lose your training partner a little bit, go ahead, is just put your head to the mat, knee to the mat, and step over. Either way works out great. Now from the dorsal situation, I lift my hands up nice and high, and I bridge my hips into the opponent. If my training partner insists on going flat to the mat, we'll often look to go into rotate for high elbow guillotines from the mount. We discuss that a little bit later on in some of our other transitions. Okay, but my elbow looks to circle out and over my training partner's shoulder, and I sit back as my hands go high for the strangle. Okay, so we can either stop him on his side and we can strangle, or if we get all the way to the mount, we pull our elbow over like so. If for some reason my training partner does a good job separating my hands and I only end up with one hand on the neck, it is also possible for us to sprawl our hips out, dig our hand underneath our training partner's jaw as we pinch our elbow back to finish a one-arm guillotine. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Okay, my elbow pinches back, my wrist comes high, my hips sprawl into the opponent, and we look to finish like so. So you have a lot of good options to follow my opponent. Once again, following my opponent through a roll. We go into our low or high elbow guillotine, okay? And I'm either able to follow him or I have to scissor my legs. Let's rotate so they can see. Or I have to scissor my legs to come up to follow. From here, I step over the back and I drive my hips into my opponent to finish. If he capitulates completely to his back, we rotate that elbow over and sit back. If I lose my grip, we have our one-handed strangle like so, where my elbow comes back and my wrist comes high. Another way that we can follow the opponent is anytime my training partner gets off balance in a way where he rolls over my shoulders. Whenever this happens, if I haven't followed my opponent already, I look at my opponent's hips and move my head out of the way. I'm going to do a backward roll, but if I just try to do it with my head in the way, it's hard to do. We often find ourselves getting stuck. My head moves out of the way, I look at the hips, and I roll over the opponent. This can often also happen in situations where my training partner falls over to his side. As he falls over to the side, we end up in these inverted situations. All right, maybe I was going for an anaconda strangle or something, and my training partner ends up flat on his back here. Instead of rolling my opponent through, you can always look at the hip and hop into the mounted situation. From here, I fight for my high elbow or my single arm guillotine for the finish. Okay? In this way, As my training partner tries to move and navigate himself about the front headlocking system, I can always follow my training partner and find ways to hit him with submission threats. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some transitions from front headlock situations into my opponent's legs. There's quite a few different opportunities to do so. Again, working that upper body to lower body transition that I've emphasized so much, explaining that it's just such an important thing to be able to do, to move about your opponent's body from the feet all the way to the head, and back and forth between the two. So the first place that we're going to start is going to be with elevations. Okay. So in any front headlocking situation that I get involved in, typically it's going to be involving guillotines. Okay. Katagatame situations are a little bit different in terms of like elevating. So typically when we're getting involved in guillotine attacks, whether it be arm in, okay, or arm out guillotines, whether it's low elbow, high elbow, whatever the case may be, all right, something interesting happens. As we go to try to finish the submission holds, right, it's often difficult, okay, for whatever reason, my hands aren't high enough, I'm not able to crunch my training partner's chin in, etc. Okay, so I'm having a tough time really enacting whatever finish I'm getting. So to reset myself, I just place my foot on the inside, and I'll give a little push-pull, and we'll kind of sit ourselves back up. This is going to help us get a little bit of momentum for the next move that we're going to hit, which is an elevation. All right, with 2 feet on the inside, what I'm going to begin to do is lift and elevate my training partner as if I was going to sweep him over. Okay, if I was successful in my elevation to knock my training partner over, he would get rolled completely through. More than likely, my opponent's going to stop me at some point. So as I begin to elevate my training partner, he's going to start to base out. Okay? This will probably work best in situations where I'm not in head and arm guillotines. Why? The arm gets somewhat in the way. Okay? Because I'm eventually going to look for my training partner's legs. So if my training partner's arm is underneath my arms, might not be a great transition. It's not impossible, but it's going to make the transition much harder. So we're typically going to look in situations where I just have a guillotine around my training partner's neck or high elbow. As I start elevating my training partner and he bases out, I'm just going to reach for my training partner's leg that's closest to me. I start disengaging my training partner's head, and I move into situations where my knee comes behind my training partner's knee. As we know, when we get into our standard Ashigarami situation, all of our outside holds are here. Okay, heel hooks, toe holds, and the like. Okay, and of course, as we transition, if we'd like, we can go into that scoop transition where we hit our cross Ashigarami or 50-50 transitions to get into our training partner's legs as well. Okay, that's one way we can elevate from the guillotine. Okay, basically using standard sumigaeshi with both of my feet on the inside of my training partner's hips. There is another way, just like with Kimura. How we saw how we can do both standard sumigaeshi with knees on opposite sides of hips, all right, and Yoko sumigaeshi. The same thing will be true with our guillotine situations. Noticing my 2 knees are pointed out to the side, like so, instead of square, like so. Once again, I would say in general it will benefit us to be in a situation where we're not trapping our opponent's arm. We're mostly going after guillotine here. Okay? As I get into this transition, my knee pokes out to the side, and I'm going to start pulling my opponent around the corner, okay? As I lean back and draw my training partner, the first submission sequence that's available to me is the near leg, okay? I move into a situation where I can put my heel over my training partner's hip, and just like last time, we have a number of transitions from the outside, or if I can get him far enough away from me, our Senkaku transitions into our training partner's legs, okay? If I have enough of an ability to elevate my training partner, it is also possible for me to enter on my training partner's second leg, okay? Just like with the Kimura situation. As I begin elevating and drawing my training partner out, the second leg comes near, I let go of the head, and we hit a cross Ashigarami situation on my training partner's leg like so. All right, once again, typically feeding into inverted heel hooks and knee bars. Let's look at that transition one more time. So, as I get into my guillotine situations where I want to start attacking legs and use elevations, I find a situation where I can put 2 knees to one side. This often happens All right, while I'm trying to elevate my training partner, shift my training partner, and my training partner thinks about trying to kind of expose my back here. Okay, whenever this happens, I hold on to my training partner's neck. I keep my foot engaged inside my training partner's thigh. All right, I'm going to start falling down to a shoulder, and as I fall down to that shoulder, I pull my training partner around the corner. From here, I get a hold of my training partner's knee. I lock in, and I get to my inverted heel hooks or potentially knee bar attacks. It's also possible for me to gain a little bit of extra leverage in this move, or should I say momentum, potential energy, by shifting further forward, possibly even popping up to one of my knees. Okay? This might help aid me in getting into those cross Ashigarami situations, because I can really throw my training partner around the corner. Go back. One of the things I might recommend is to let go of the guillotine about halfway through so you can really bring your training partner around the corner. Sometimes the head restricts movement. It's hard to reach for that second leg. So what I look to do is as I pull and fold myself, I'm going to let go of the head and roll onto the backs of my shoulders. From here, I grab both legs, and I move right into situations where I can lock into inverted heel hooks. Okay? And in this way, we can use elevations in order to get inside my training partner's legs from front head locking situations. Once again, under the category or the premise that I'm looking to go from guillotines into leg locks, there's another position which is very common where we can transition to our training partner's legs, which are dorsal situations. Dorsal situations with front headlocks occur for a few different reasons. Often it's the case that my training partner falls down towards one of his shoulders, okay, whenever I'm going for these guillotine attacks, because he's trying to compensate for the pressure. So it's often the case that as I'm going into any form of guillotine, that my training partner falls down towards the shoulder, okay? And as my training partner falls down towards the shoulder, we have various attacks from here. We saw earlier in the DVD that I can step over my training partner and drive my hips in, etc. We could even do this, I didn't mention it, but you're also able to do this with the arm on the inside. Still a very good technique. All the while I'm in this situation, my training partner's feet are facing towards me, okay? When my training partner's feet face me, I can often look to transfer to the legs by grabbing the first leg, placing my knee inside the hip, and moving in towards my training partner's top leg. Once again, we're in a transition where outside locks are favored. I really like attacking in these side-on situations sometimes because my training partner takes some time to get up. So it's often the case that I can get some good braking pressure, all right, while my training partner tries to correct his body, all right? And before he even gets up, I can start putting some real pressure on some outside heel hooks and toe holds and things, okay? Of course, just like before, as I engage in this top leg attack, and my training partner goes to get up on top, if I get into 2-on-1 situations and I keep my training partner away, we have those movements where we can pass our legs through our training partner's legs and look to expose our training partner's heels. Okay, either 50-50 or cross Ashigarami. Okay. Other times that we might get into dorsal situations from front headlock, some submissions just call for it. Okay, I get into Darce strangles, for example, and I'm trying to finish with the Darce. Maybe I was trying to step over. I'm getting entangled in my training partner's legs, and I'm feeling the Darce start to slip out. Well, instead of losing everything, we go right into our training partner's legs. Okay. Now, another possibility, instead of attacking my training partner's top side leg, is attacking the bottom side leg. We do this again in situations where my training partner tries to retreat that top leg. As he retreats that top leg, I stick my leg in the center of my training partner's legs, and I bring my other leg underneath, like so, to form a cross Ashigarami. I can start coming up into seated positions on top of my training partner and falling for knee bars. Or, of course, the classic inverted heel hook. Okay? So again, we're in that dorsal situation, however it may have occurred. Okay? Arm in guillotine this time we'll even do. Okay? And now I want to try to attack my training partner's top leg, but it's either not apparent or I'm more interested in getting cross Ashigarami on the bottom leg. Another way that we can get there, even if my training partner keeps this leg in place, but I'd really like to attack the bottom side leg, is I put my leg in the center and I push my training partner's leg out to the side. As I push the leg out to the side, my training partner's bottom leg will naturally raise as my hips come off the ground. As this happens, I drop my bottom leg into position. And now we're ready to work like so, moving into our inverted heel hook attacks on my training partner's bottom leg. So you can see that in many dorsal situations that involve front headlock, whether it be katagatame, whether it be guillotine situations, whatever it is, so my training partner falls down to his side, we have opportunities to enter into our training partner's legs in both the top and the bottom leg. Something that happens that's a little bit unique to the front headlocking system because it's in combination with the front headlocking system in terms of transference to the legs is cradles. Cradle typically involves either one or both of my training partner's legs end to head. Therefore, to transfer to that situation in any other submission sequence is highly unlikely. However, for front headlock, it can happen quite often. Okay, my training partner comes into his knees. Okay, and one of the worst mistakes my training partner can make in terms of offering me cradles is my training partner can begin to step his same side leg up, okay, that I'm on. Okay, as my training partner steps that leg up, it's quite easy for me to start linking into my training partner's legs. If he steps up the other leg, no such cradle is particularly available to me. It would be a lot more work. Okay, so as my training partner steps his near side leg up, it becomes a situation where I can just lock my hands like so around my training partner. As I lock my hands around my training partner, a couple different things can occur, but one of the easiest ways to knock my training partner down in this situation is to step up, and as I step up, slide and penetrate my knee forward to knock my training partner down. When I do this, what you'll see is I lift up on the legs as I knock my training partner down at the head. Okay? So my training partner begins to step up. Okay? I begin to tilt my training partner down. Now, you're basically back in dorsal position. Okay? So all those transitions that we had previously worked on from a dorsal guillotine or dorsal front head and arm are all available to you, all the same leg locks and transitions. Okay? Nothing really changes. Go back into turtle position. Okay? The only thing that I would say would be somewhat different is sometimes you can get this transition without your training partner stepping the leg up, and which would make this transition somewhat different, right? I go into front head and arm, and I just grab don't step the leg up. I just grab my training partner by the shin, like so, okay? And I step my leg up. From here, I can go shin to shin, and just pull my training partner's leg open. Other than that, once I get to a cradle position, okay, with the leg stepped up, and I knock my training partner down, any transition that we went for previously would be possible. We have all of our outside submissions, okay? As our training partner comes up, we have the ability to rotate around the corner and lock our senkakus, okay? And then, of course, even from that cradle, step up, I have an even greater ability to get to this bottom leg, because I have full control over the top leg. So as I go stepping, it really tilts my training partner up onto his side, making it quite easy for me to edge my knee underneath. I'll do it on the other side. Come up to your knees, facing me. Steps up his leg. I move into cradles. I knock him down. And now instead of moving to the top leg, I scissor underneath the bottom leg, moving into our inverted heel hooks or knee bar transitions. Now we're going to take a little bit of a look at how we can move from front headlock situations to Kimura. I had mentioned to you before that it's a really important relationship to develop between front headlock and Kimura because almost every time you're in a front headlocking situation, Kimuras are available to you. Okay? So let's assume that I've gone after some sort of a guillotine, whether it be arm on the inside, whether it be arm out, whatever the case may be. I'll do it on this side so the camera can see. So as I move into these guillotines, it's often the case that my training partner manages to start trying to defend by grabbing onto hands. Okay? As my training partner starts trying to fight my hands, one of the first things I'll think about doing is taking my hands out and moving right into that Kimura transition. Even if initially he's grabbing my wrist, all I need is that open elbow position to score my Kimura. Okay? Now I might go into my finish, okay, or I might transition elsewhere, okay, but once again, that Kimura is available to me. So I'm struggling to finish. My training partner is doing a good job separating hands. I feel like the head's going to come out and just switch right into my Kimura. Okay? I might be able to go into my finish from here. Okay? Now, this can also happen if I was sitting up. Okay? Perhaps I went into my guillotine. I started sitting up a little bit so that I could gain a little bit of momentum. And we could go right into our other Kimura transitions like we talked about before, maybe entering my training partner's legs. We'll talk about how we can move into 3-part combinations later on in the DVD. All right? But you get the rough idea, okay? I have those guillotine situations. The Kimura is just right there and available to me. All right? Even in arm-in situations, as my training partner is particularly defending, right, I can always move right into Kimura situations. All right? I would say that this is probably safest when you've sat up, okay? Because now I have a little bit of time to make my switch. And if I fail, my training partner is starting to push into me before I feel like I can make my transition, I can kind of always go back into my guillotine, okay? All right, so once again, we have some sort of guillotine transition, all right? And I either sit up and go after my Kimura, or I'm on my back, my training partner's hand fighting, and I feel like I'm about to lose it, no problem. I release, I go right into my Kimura, okay? That's how we look to go for Kimura from front headlock, okay, whenever we're in kind of bottom situations. Now we're going to move into from front headlock to Kimura situations in a slightly different body position. Like I said, the dorsal situation comes up quite a bit in many of our submission transitions. From front headlock, it's no different, okay? We've done this in other transitions before, all right? Whether my training partner falls over to his shoulder from an initial attack, okay? Whether my attack forces my training partner onto his shoulder like a katagatame, right? All of these movements are going to expose my training partner for Kimura the same way that they expose my training partner to various front headlocking submissions, okay? So as my training partner's on his shoulder, let's say I have just a regular guillotine in place and my training partner fights the hands, of course, once again, I can look to make my transition to Kimura. Maybe I look for the finish from here. Maybe I don't. But again, we have transitions to that submission. Arm in, it's exactly the same. All right, my training partner comes arm in, I can look for that Kimura. Now, one thing I will say, okay, the arm in transition changes things a little bit. Okay, why? Because my training partner's arm is kind of tight to my body. So if I just go kind of hunting for Kimura here, it's a difficult thing. When he just grabs my hands from a regular side-on or dorsal guillotine situation, grab my hands, okay, and he's fighting hands, it's a little easier because the hands and elbows become open, okay? Whenever my training partner has an arm attached to my body, okay, that changes things a little bit. I must create an opening for the Kimura. Otherwise, when I go to hunt for it, my training partner bridges on top of me, and he stays tight and passes my guard, etc. So, one of the things I like to do when I get here is I like to take my elbow, come in front of my training partner's elbow, and shove slightly forward. This creates a little gap between his elbow and my chest. I can even post on my training partner's rib cage. As my training partner tries to bridge up on top of me, etc., I can create the space to fish my hand through and get to my Kimura. I can improve on this even more so by using a thumb wedge. As I get my elbow in front of his elbow, he tries to penetrate his underhook deep. It's hard. Okay? I'm blocking him. I then swim my thumb inside my training partner's bicep. So I have even more of a gap between me and my training partner. And even if my training partner succeeds at putting me to bottom position, I can almost always punch into Kimura situations from here. Okay, so we have a thumb on the inside, we have the elbow in front. Okay, I could also put the elbow over top. This isn't wrong. Even 4 fingers on the inside. It really depends on how tight my training partner is from the beginning. Okay, I would say the tighter he is, the more inclined I am to come in front of the elbow like so and come from the thumb underneath. But if I have a little bit of space, I can just shove the thumb down Or I can shove 4 fingers inside, and once again, there we go, moving in for a Kimura transition. It is possible that I could just grab my training partner's wrist and go, but you're taking big risks here. I really want to start trying to find ways to create that space to make that Kimura transition possible. If you're in other submission holds, perhaps like a Katagatame or something like that, it's a little bit easier from an overhook. I can move right into that Kimura. I don't have to worry about posting and opening shoulders or anything like that. Okay? But again, basically any time I'm able to put my training partner into this dorsal situation, okay, knock my training partner onto his side from a Darce strangle, all right, from a guillotine, whatever it is, all right, I'm likely going to be able to enter into Kimura situations on my training partner. Now we're going to take a look at how to move from front headlock situations into arm locking situations on my training partner. When I'm referring to arm locks, of course, we've already come across Kimura, but we're talking about more straight arm locks than anything else. So one of the situations that occurs when I'm in bottom position that allows me to get into arm locking situations on my training partner, right, is such that as I'm going for various forms of guillotine, okay, etc., and my training partner's beginning to defend, when I go into the arm-in transition, okay, I don't allow my training partner to cover my shoulders, okay? That's what makes it unique, okay, compared to just the neck guillotine situations where my training partner can try to cover my shoulder and hop across to the other side and look to pass. This is a common transition to try to weaken the guillotine situations, okay? So if I'm going to go into guillotine transitions with the arm on the inside, I can use the arm that my training partner's already compressed to me with to start working into arm locking submissions. What I'll do is as my training partner attempts to pull his head free, often my training partner will do movements where he takes his thumb and posts inside my bicep and tries to pull his head free. As this happens, I move my hand behind my training partner's elbow, I cross frame on my training partner's neck, and I bring my knees in like so. What we're going to be going for is a Te-Gatame transition. My leg climbs over my training partner's shoulders, my knee goes inside my training partner's neck, and it's a push-pull. As I pull with my right leg, I push with my left, driving my hips up, and I have to stabilize the elbow. If I allow the elbow to turn, it's not the end of the world. There's other things that we can do, okay? But I can't hit my straight arm lock. So my knee pushes in, my hip pulls in, and we hip up, all right, for our Te-Gatame transition. Okay, so look at this again. So if I choose to go arm in guillotine, okay, as my training partner is attempting to defend, etc., he may thumb post out and start moving away from me. Another way that I could make this transition, if I so choose, is I could sit up on my training partner and I could put a cross frame in place. Now, I grab underneath my elbow, my training partner's elbow, and I rotate as my arm pinches my training partner's wrist. Push-pull action, and we get into the break. Of course, you can see that there'll be many other transitions into submission holds from here, okay? But we're going to cover that in the arm locking section, okay? Another way that we can go to work if our training partner has the arm in, okay, of course, is to work into omoplata situations. Okay, so once again, I'm working into guillotines. All right, my training partner starts trying to pull his head free. So long as I still have the arm, I post my training partner away, and I move myself into omoplata. From here, of course, I can enter into the legs. I can do any of the possible transitions that we talked about before, maybe going back and extending my training partner's arm. We have a ton of different options, okay? But we want to be able to link those submissions. We'll get into those three-part chains a little bit later on, okay? Now, what happens if I just have my training partner's neck, all right, and I want to transition to my training partner's arms? Okay, what will often happen when I just have my training partner's neck is he will try to cover my shoulder. When he covers my shoulder, he's open for Udigatame situations, where my elbow covers my training partner's elbow, I release the guillotine, and I start moving my training partner away. From here, I'm able to throw over my training partner's shoulder with my knees, and I'm able to put pressure on my training partner's arm for the break. Okay? Now, is it likely, let's go ahead and cover, okay? As I go into Udigatame situations, is it likely that I break my training partner's arm from this position? Probably not. But just like the Tegatame, just like the omoplata, it will often lead to other areas to submit my training partner. Okay? So once again, we're just consistently threatening our training partner, all right, with submissions. Okay? So I have that guillotine, now I have the Udagatame option. Okay, and as I go from Udagatame, it will be our route, our path to other submissions, which we'll talk about a little bit in the arm locking system. All right, so now you guys will have an ability to move from a situation where it seems like your training partner is about to pull free from a submission hold, where you'll still have some offensive options to keep them under that submission threat. Now we're going to be looking at our front head locking situation and how we can move into arm locks from dorsal situations. All right, so like as we discussed before, in many of our front head locks, whether it be Darce strangles where we force our training partner down to a shoulder, or guillotines, arm-in guillotines, etc., and the like, where my training partner chooses to fall to a shoulder to try to defend the move, there's going to be numerous opportunities for attacks on our training partner's arms. One of the ways we can do it is from the inside, okay? If I have my hands on the inside of my training partner's bicep like so, okay, I can go in and grab my training partner by the back of the tricep, post on my training partner's head, and move around the corner for arm locking transitions. Typically, I won't stay in quarter juji gatame. It's kind of a weak juji. All right, so we're going to look to go into a full juji situation and look to go into the break. Okay, so do this again. In any given situation where my arm is on the inside, I can cover my training partner's tricep coming in front of the bicep, start scissoring my legs, and move into arm lock transitions off of my training partner, off of the front headlock on my training partner. Okay? Once we get here, we'll look to pull the elbow across the hip. All right, 2-on-1, we go into our breaks. Okay? Now, sometimes when we engage in front headlocking situations, whether it be the Darce strangle or whether it be arm-in guillotine, my training partner manages to be the one that has his arm on the inside. Okay, so the idea of getting inside for the arm locking situation is no longer possible. So we keep outside position, no problem. Even from the outside position, we'll still have entries into our training partner's arms here if we so choose. Okay, from this situation, I'll look to pop up, all right, where my training partner has an extended arm, typically holding on to my training partner's elbow, and I'll look to step around the corner. Now, as I step around the corner, I have kind of two choices here. I can ease into the move by pinching my knee, or I can make an attempt to swing my leg all the way around the corner in front of my training partner's face. Okay? Personally, because I worry about kicking people directly in the face, and because I feel as though in some instances it's somewhat tighter, I just keep a pinch on my training partner's arm like so. Okay? And now I move myself across my training partner's body, and later on I'll look to cover my training partner's head. We can look to finish in Tegatame, as we did previously, or if it gets a little bit of a struggle, and my training partner starts turning his thumb, we have trouble there, we'll go back to 2-on-1 situations and break the arm. Another situation we can get involved in here, as I go to step my leg up over my training partner's shoulder, so we went from guillotine to this knee pinch on my training partner's shoulder, is I can scoop underneath my training partner's arm and go right into that Udagatame we discussed previously. Okay? Again, is it likely that I break my training partner's arm in Udagatame? Absolutely not. But as we'll see later, it's very useful for keeping an extended arm and going into triangle transition. Okay? So it's another great offensive option when we feel as though we're in dorsal situations, all right, and we'd like to attack our training partner's arms. Okay? So basically from dorsal situations, we have an overhook and an underhook that we'll be working off of, and both of which allow us to enter in on our training partner's arms for attacks. Now we have the mount situation with the guillotine. It doesn't occur as often as some of the other guillotine transitions, but it's worthy of note because it is a good finishing position. All right, so from front headlock, it's often the case that I either roll my training partner over his shoulders towards one side to get to the mount. Okay, so he falls to the side, and I step over into the mount. Or it's also very possible that I hit my training partner with various forms of sumigation, and I get to the mount. Okay, now, When I do so, scoot up towards center, okay? When I do so, it very much depends on what type of guillotine situations I'm involved in as to what my switches are going to be. So I'll start on this side so we can see. Assuming I'm working for my high elbow situation, in which I like to circle my forehead across the mat and then bring my training partner's chin to his chest. One of the ways my training partner can attempt to prevent this is by covering my shoulder like we talked about last time. Okay, now it's very hard for me to get to that transition. No problem, I go elbow to elbow, just like we did before, and I start sliding my knee up. Alright, so we can start setting up that Udigatame transition. Okay? Now, because from this specific position, you wouldn't be able to apply braking pressure to the Udigatame because of the angle, we just use it to straighten out the arm and work our way into other submissions, just like we said before. Alright? So as I notice my training partner is covering my shoulder, I transition elbow to elbow, I slide my knee up, and I slide my knee over my training partner's far bicep. So you guys can see this angle. He covers the shoulder. I go in elbow to elbow, and I bring my knee over his bicep. Once I've brought the knee over the bicep, I can easily fall over into a normal Udigatame situation and probably pass off fairly quickly into triangle situations. The other situation that can occur when I'm in that mounted position is if I have my training partner's arm on the inside. Okay, so we're going to end up center. If I keep the arm on the inside when I get mounted, it's often hard to finish this transition, all right, with the guillotine in place and actually strangle my training partner from here. So what I'll do is base on the mat, and I keep that arm extended, just like we did last time. Now we have options to go back into Udigatame, and of course go into our triangle transitions, or come back down. Back down. Or we can move into Jujigatame, like so. All right, with our Teigatame, or if we lose Tei, right into our arm locks. Okay, so look at this again. Once again, working to get into a mounted situation from front headlock, where I have my training partner's arm trapped. From here, it might be hard to finish my training partner unless I tried to come off to the side and strangle. So I keep one hand on my training partner's arm, one hand on the mat. I go hand to elbow. I do this for a very important reason. If I start pulling up with an overhook, pull down, I often lose my training partner's elbow. So I cup the elbow in the tricep. As he tries to retract, I never quite lose the arm. I step my leg up, and I pull my training partner into a position where the arm becomes exposed. Okay? From this arm exposure, okay, we have that Udigatame situation we discussed before. We actually also have a nice Kimura, which I didn't discuss, okay, from this position. Okay? From the Udigatame, we look to move to triangle, and of course, down. And of course, we also have arm locks in this situation. Okay? Or I should say the Jujigatame from this situation. Okay? So as you can see, if I move myself into a situation where I have the guillotine in the mounted situation, if my training partner covers my shoulder, we have good attacks on the arm because he extends his own arm. All right? And because my training partner has his arm underneath my arm, I can force his arm into extension for other arm locks as well. Now we're going to take a little bit of a look at transitions from front headlock to triangles. Basically, anytime you're controlling your training partner's head and arm, all right, in a relevant way, or have access to your training partner's head and arm in a relevant way, there's probably some sort of triangles available. So just because I'm doing so with the upper body and I'm using my hands doesn't mean that the lower body couldn't get involved, okay? This typically happens when I'm in bottom position, where I either control my training partner's head and arm for a head and arm guillotine, okay, or I just control my training partner's neck. Because even with just control over the neck, I typically have access to my training partner's arms, okay? So the first transition we'll look at is when I have the head and arm guillotine, where this arm's already isolated inside the submission hold. Okay, typically we have a leg across my training partner's knee shield and a leg over the top. Okay, what my training partner will often do to defend is he'll take his far arm and grab my hands to try to separate. He can't really get the arm that's extended by my back in as effectively. Okay, it's usually much better isolated. It's not impossible, but it's usually much better isolated with my arm. So what we're going to do is, as my training partner focuses his attention on this hand, I'm just going to look to reposition my legs into a full guard situation. Now this alone starts to help me strangle my training partner with the head and arm guillotine. Okay? Even from here, as my training partner tries to pull his head out posture, I can switch to the triangle, okay, or at least a trap triangle situation. You might even be able to finish the guillotine here, or I always have the ability to release and move myself in the front triangle situation. Okay, let's look at that transition one more time. I have head and arm guillotine. I first work as my training partner's addressing the hands to get into a full guard to tighten things up. I can bring my knees to chest, things will get a lot tighter. Now as my training partner's wrestling the hand away, he's doing all these things, I'm just going to look to open my legs up and lock over my training partner's shoulder. Now whether I complete the guillotine or I release it, we have the ability to start transitioning into triangle attacks here. Now, assuming I just have control over my opponent's neck, this changes things a little bit. As I go to strangle with either high elbow or low elbow, my training partner will often look to try to cover my shoulder with his arm. We discussed this for arm locking, where I could move into udigatame situations. All right, my elbow covers my training partner's elbow, and you'll see my training partner extending his far arm. Let's rotate in front of the camera. Good. All right, as my training partner does this, it's quite easy for me to pommel my legs to the inside and find access to triangle situations. Let's look at that again. So as I'm falling with just my arms around my training partner's neck, it's often the case that he tries to reach over the shoulder. From here, I can start scoring udigatame situations where my elbow covers his, and then I can start pommeling my way into the triangle. Okay? So basically, as we start getting arms extended, we have good options and opportunity for triangles. Now, another thing that we can look at in the arm-in situation is we can look at the idea of not just pommeling around my training partner's arm, but also looking at getting my training partner to post. As I'm finishing in these sorts of situations, okay, it's often the case that I have the ability to off-balance my training partner towards my left. So as he's addressing the hands, okay, maybe I wanted to try to pommel out, but I couldn't get my leg out, okay? So I'm in a situation like this. His elbow is blocking me, okay? I couldn't get my leg out. Instead, what we do is we use our foot underneath our training partner's hamstring as an off balance to get our training partner to post. So I start lifting. If he doesn't address this and he doesn't post, he just gets knocked over and I can begin my front headlocking sequences. Okay? If he does post, my training partner extends his arm and gives me an opportunity to pommel into triangles. Okay? We can even do this in very creative ways where I can first sit up, let go of my training partner's head, and control my training partner's arm. Now from here, I start off balancing my training partner. I can look to pommel into triangles. I can even knock my training partner completely over and pommel myself into triangles. Look at this one more time. In situations where I have an arm trapped and I get my training partner to post, I can either make use of that post by pommeling my legs through to get to triangles, or I can grab a hold of the post. So as I forward shift and I off balance, I can grab my training partner's hand and either keep it out of the way for the pommel, or knock my training partner to the mat and pommel back in. So here we angle off, knees together, finishing with strong triangle attacks from the front headlock transition. All right, now we're going to take a little bit of a look at how we can transfer from front headlock to triangles in dorsal situations. There's quite a few different opportunities. You'll see some things that are very similar when we were talking about Kimura transitions, because the dorsal situation is just similar in almost any of these submission transitions. So If I have knocked my training partner down, so let's just come up to get started, okay? What'll typically happen is I get involved in guillotines and my training partner falls over. Or, another way that this can happen, my training partner's flat on his back, okay? And what happens when my training partner's pinned in side control? He many times looks to try to dig underhooks in, turn into me, etc., at which point I can move into variations of front headlock, right? So, in situations where I have my training partner in head and arm guillotines, okay, whenever I have this submission hold, I definitely have opportunities for triangle. As you saw in the previous video where we did the triangles somewhat from bottom position, okay, my training partner's arm is extended underneath my arm and I have control over my training partner's head. So realistically, all I need to do is get a leg over my training partner's back and a knee in front of my training partner's shoulder, and I'll have triangle transitions waiting for me. And whether I physically finish the triangle there or try to finish the guillotine from the triangle position, both are good submission opportunities, and both are useful for transferring to the triangle. I can also do this in a way where I let go of my training partner's head by stepping over my training partner and sliding the knee underneath him like so. Okay? As I do this, I rock back and recline, putting some weight on my training partner's chest, and I cross my feet behind my training partner. As I've done this, I can roll over into bottom position, take my angle, and finish the triangle. Of course, sometimes I'll be controlling my training partner's neck, and I won't have my training partner's arm. Okay? In these instances, my training partner is often covering shoulders as opposed to being in underhook situations, so I get to score the underhook. Now the transition is fairly similar. Okay? I'm just basically going to look to step over my training partner, slide my knee in front of my training partner's shoulder, and look to control my training partner with a triangle. Let's go back. Of course, I could also take this so far as to step into Udagatame situations, which we discussed in prior transitions. And I can use that to take me into triangle situations. Okay? Furthermore, from dorsal situations, if I'd like to move into triangles on my opponent, whether I have my training partner in this underhook or overhooking type situation, I can start, let's rotate so your head's in the other direction. I can start moving to other forms of triangle depending upon where my feet are placed. So, as I'm going in for my guillotine and I'd like to step into a side triangle, for example, I just look to step my foot in front of my training partner. Okay? Now, as I step the foot in front of my training partner, I step past my training partner's head, and I can pull my training partner right into side triangle situations, where I extend that knee down, like so, and drive my hip into my training partner's neck for the finish. As always, when we step that foot in the pocket, okay, we also have opportunities to move into back triangle situations. So if I'm in some sort of front headlock and I transition off into this underhook, all right, either I put my knee down to pin the bicep or step in. Sometimes the knee and the bicep is helpful to just kind of keep your training partner's arm pinned for the time being. Okay? Now I look to make my transition over my training partner's head, and I'll just slide that right in to switching to the armpit. Once I get here, I fall back over my training partner's head, and there's that transition to back triangle. So let's look at that again. Those two possible transitions. Okay? So I'm engaged in some sort of a front headlocking situation. All right? I prefer the underhook to make this transition. Okay? When I get into this underhook situation, I just look to place my feet, all right, inside my training partner's armpit. Okay? From here, I look to step over my training partner's head. I have options to fall into side triangle. Okay? Where I pull myself in. I straighten out the legs so my hip attaches. And the hip attaches to the neck for the submission. And then, in a similar instance, as I step into that space, or move your hips back so you can see, or I pin with my knee, as I step over, I just look to step right inside the armpit and open my knee. This opening of the knee gives me the passage to the back triangle. And from here, we lock up like so, and we're on the pursuit of back triangle combinations, arm bars, kimuras, all different kinds of things available to us here. Okay, now we're going to take a look at a little bit of a more obscure transition. from front headlock to triangle from turtle. My training partner comes into turtle position. All right, I'm starting to engage in front headlocks. And what does my training partner do? He starts getting a hold of my legs. All right, this can be problematic when we're trying to fall into our front headlock and submissions. It's not to say that it completely ruins things. Sometimes we can manage to fall into various forms of katagatame and things while our training partner holds on to a single leg. All right, but it does stifle us often. Okay, and it often also causes us to worry a little bit about the idea of kind of getting taken down into a situation where my training partner might be cross-side, where a lot of the front headlock and submissions are going to struggle to work. Okay, it's a lot harder to finish somebody when they end up cross-side. All right. So when my training partner starts engaging in the leg, we might want to take a different strategy. One of the things my training partner does by grabbing my leg is he naturally opens up his elbows. Okay? As my training partner opens up his elbows like so, it becomes incredibly easy for me to trap my training partner's elbow from the outside and put my heel behind it. From here, I swing my other leg through and I lock up. Okay? Now, it is possible for me to finish from a position like this by driving my hip into my training partner's neck. But more than likely, when I get to this transition, what I often will do is rotate my training partner over my body into side triangle. It gets a little wishy-washy here. Just come up to your knees. Okay, as I'm trying to finish the strangle, holding onto my training partner's hips and driving my hips in. All right, maybe it's not tight enough and it's a little hard to readjust. Okay, I take my training partner's body and I pull my opponent to the side like so. From here, we're right in our side triangle. We lock up, driving our hip into our training partner's neck for the finish. So do this again. Okay. I'm engaging in front headlock and he scores a single leg. I switch from front headlock to controlling my training partner's outside elbow. I swing my leg through and I lock up. Notice I didn't fall onto my back when I tried to make this transition. This often results in your training partner posturing up and out of the move. Okay. Instead, I keep my body floating over my opponent and balanced on my hand on the far side. If you can't see that, all I'm doing is holding my body weight up like so. I can sag down to an elbow if I'd like, but I don't like to fall completely to my back. And here we lock up. Okay. Now once it's locked, I can fall to my butt and I can start to finish. If it's not working, I bring my training partner over to the other side and I focus on finishing it. You got true side triangle. Knee getting nice and deep, hip pressed against my training partner's neck for the finish. We're going to take a little look at a entry from front headlock to triangle that's a little unique. This is something that I've been working on for a little while now, a few years. Basically we move from a front headlocking situation to one where we control both of our opponent's shoulders. I really like this concept because it does a good job of moving into the limbs, all right, and moving into the back. So my training partner is in a seated guard situation, all right. It's often the case that as my training partner is leaning forward and reaching for me, we have opportunities to snap my training partner into front head, okay. When I do this, I have some various submissions that we could be working on here. We might cover this at other points in the DVD, like from the seated position. There's some submissions that wouldn't normally be available to you when your training partner's on their knees, or be a little bit easier. But what I'm going to do is instead of working my guillotine, okay, after I snap that head down, I'm just going to cover one shoulder on one side with an underhook and one shoulder with an overhook. If you'd like to see that on the other side, after I snap my training partner's head down and I'm in that guillotine, I'm going to go over under. Okay? So we have this situation where my hands are hidden on either side, over and under my training partner's shoulders. Now what we're going to do is as I go to try to move around my training partner's guards, I step inside, and as I step inside, my leg comes in contact with my training partner's bicep. As I slide behind my training partner, I'm able to maneuver right to a back triangle. So look at this again. I start by snapping my training partner's head down and covering my training partner's shoulders. So I'm initially in guillotine sequences. All right, as my training partner's hand fighting, I take one out and one in. One under, one over. I'm going to post on my training partner's tricep, and I'm going to step towards the inside, almost forcing my training partner's arm to contact my leg. Slide behind, and as I catch my training partner's arm, we can move behind for the back triangle. Now let's take a look at moving from the front headlock to the back. This is an incredibly important transition. I'm sure in John's front headlocking DVD, he covered this. The idea that as I'm pursuing various forms of front headlock submission, whether it be guillotine, Darce, whatever the case may be, as I start to get frustrated by my training partner's ability to fight hands and defend, it makes the most sense to just move behind my training partner. All right? As my training partner's on his knees, we'll first start working on the idea of just going behind. Okay? Technically, that's what you're always doing when you're going to get the back. But typically, anytime you're in front of your training partner in front headlock and you move around, these moves are typically referred to as go-behinds. So let's talk about a couple of my favorites. All right, probably first and foremost, one of the easiest and most recognizable is to go into various forms of front headlocking and go into an arm drag grip. Okay? You can do this in a few different ways. Okay? You can do this on the same side that you're on the front headlock, and you can post on the elbow and drag the arm, and you can use that to move behind your opponent and eventually take the back, start working into the back system. Okay? You can also use your knee to block your opponent's elbow, and as you do so, you can use that to move behind your training partner. Okay? Even using your hand to block your elbow. Your opponent's elbow is a great, efficient use of a go behind. Okay? So once again, we have a transition where we go into arm drag grips and move behind. Oh, and I was going to mention before, you can do this on either side. Sometimes it's a nice transition to start in front headlock on this side, shrug your training partner's head to this side, and then transfer the arm drag on the other side. I like this as a go behind because sometimes he's expecting it on the near side, and it makes it a little harder for me to get behind my training partner. So I like shifting my training partner over first, dragging, and then moving behind. I have a lot more success with this. Okay? And we also have knee block go behind, where I can transition behind. Wrist or hand blocks. Like so. Okay? And these are basically some of my favorite ways of just from a turtle situation, just moving behind the opponent. And again, the reason we use these, okay, I'm getting stifled. I want to try to go in for front headlocks and he's fighting hands, etc. If I'm not careful and I just stay here, my training partner will eventually post, pull his head out, and I lose position. At the very least, if I know I transfer between systems well, okay, I still have control over my opponent. And even when I get to the back, I might have methods to start moving right back into my front headlock. Okay? So you can keep the game going, keep your opponent under control, all right, and continue to transition between the back and front headlock. Now we're going to look at how we can go from front headlock to the back via cross body ride. Okay? A couple different dimensions in which we'll attack cross body ride from front head. All right? The first one is actually from the knees. This is one of the ones that's a little less common. Okay? As I go into my guillotine situation, all right? Oh, no, it's okay. As I go into like head and arm guillotine situations, regular guillotines, it would be difficult to have passage to cross body ride. All right? Reason being, my training partner's arm tends to get in the way. Even when it's out or in when it comes to front headlocking, I'm going to struggle quite a bit to actually access my training partner's back with this move because I need to come around my training partner's far shoulder, and this arm just always finds its way in the way. So all we're going to look to do is to try to create situations where before we fall back, we're able to move my training partner's arm across the body. Okay? So anytime we fall in this katagatame sequence, where the arm is across, sometimes we have trouble finishing here. It's not the easiest of the katagatames to finish. As I go to strangle, we have a tough time. All I'm going to do is lace my legs inside my training partner's legs like so. All right? Putting a scorpion. I put a hook inside my training partner's calf muscle, another one underneath the shin, and my far hand is going to wave underneath my training partner's shoulder. From here, I lock up my hands, and now we're in a cross-body ride transition. Okay? From here, of course, I can take the back or go into these numerous submissions that we have available to us from cross-body ride that we previously discussed. Okay? So once again, I either start things off by moving my training partner's elbow across, or maybe I was already down, and I said, you know what, I'm going to transition to the back. I can always off-balance my training partner and then drag arms across later on. As I fall and I try to strangle, I'm having a tough time, I lace my legs into my training partners, and I come underneath the shoulder. So I pull my training partner down, we have a great cross-body ride transition. And like I said, we can either go into various submissions or begin taking the back and start working our back system. Okay? Now that's the first of the transitions. Another great one is one that we use when we kind of go halfway behind our training partner. Okay? So as my training partner's in turtle, right, and I start my go behind actions, okay, I don't have to fall like we just did with the previous move. Okay, I start in my front headlock, I move behind, and before I even fall, I step my leg between my training partner's legs, I capture my training partner's shoulder, and we throw ourselves into cross-body ride. This is also a good transition to do from a chest lock. I move from front headlock, chest lock, knee comes to the inside, I step through, and there's my cross-body ride transition. Okay? So it's quite easy to move to the back, all right, via cross-body ride from front headlock. Okay, looking at that transition one more time. All I have to do is get past my opponent's elbows. If his elbow's in the way or is reaching for my legs, it's going to be tough to hit this move. So I have to clear that elbow, have locked hands on either the chest or that katagatame situation. I can step on the calf muscle, put my leg through, both are effective, and capture my training partner's far shoulder. From here, what you see is my two knees pinched around my training partner's leg, isolated. As he tries to move his leg around, it's difficult. I can pommel right in. And then move into submissions either cross body, okay, or the back. Now, we'll also engage in dorsal situations with front headlock. We've discussed this before. There's a number of times, perhaps maybe I hit a Darce strangle, and I knock my training partner down to the floor, where my training partner's 2 feet are facing me. Let's say I'm in the midst of trying to complete my Darce strangle. I step over my training partner's legs, and it's just not happening. Okay? There's a great transition here where I just feed my other leg in, lock my figure of 4, and I can move right to cross body ride. Okay? It doesn't have to be a Darce strangle. It can literally be any other submission. I just think it works quite nicely out of the Darce because as I knock my training partner down and as I start the finish of the strangle, I often find myself trying to step over my opponent to make this work. He starts scooting away from me, trying to extend his body, and I end up with just legs. Okay? For whatever reason, the strangle's not taking a hold. I use my foot to move my training partner's top side leg, my bottom leg to lace in, and lock a figure 4 if we can. From here, I move my shoulder to my training partner's hip, and we're in our cross-body ride entanglements all over again. Finally, we have situations where my training partner will capitulate all the way into a mounted position, okay, where I'm trying to submit my training partner, and perhaps he rolls all the way over, or another avenue to get there would be one where I hit front headlock and sumigation my training partner. Now, as I'm trying to finish in the mount, my training partner starts collecting my legs, okay? Now, for whatever reason, maybe I feel bound up and I can't complete the guillotine. If he traps one of my legs in a 3/4 mount situation, I can always release that guillotine and backstep my training partner's legs, moving into cross-body ride. Let's see this again. Go flat on your back. Okay, assuming I went into some front headlocking transition, maybe head and arm this time, and my training partner went to trap my ankle. Okay, I'm trying to submit from the mount. He goes in to trap my ankle. It's very similar to the dorsal situation, except for he's giving me the trap. All I do, post a hand on the mat, and backstep. From here, I walk towards my opponent's feet, and we look to move to cross-body ride so that we can have access to the submissions that are on my training partner's back. In these ways, we can move from front headlock to cross body ride and transition from attacking front head to attacking the back. Now we're going to take a look at that interesting transition where I control both my training partner's shoulders from a front headlock again. So as I engage with my training partner in seated guard positions, and I catch my training partner leaning a bit too far forward, all right, perhaps I can do this by elevating my training partner's feet. Okay, he starts to lean a little bit more forward so he doesn't get knocked down. Snap right into my training partner's head and neck. As I do this, I cover opposite side shoulders. Okay, once again, I have that front headlock on this side. I go underhook on one side, overhook on the other. I step inside. As I step inside, I push the elbow through so it naturally aligns with my leg. As I step around the corner, now I go right to my training partner's back this time instead of going into the cross body ride, instead of going into the back triangle like we did last time. Okay? Instead of continuing to control this arm, I look to get my seatbelt and I lock up a figure of four. With that figure of four, I now trap my training partner's arm, and I can go right in for strangles, either with one arm or, of course, the full rear naked. Okay, let's look at this again. I'm playing, I'm snapping my training partner's head down, and I capture my training partner's shoulders like so. Okay, so we initially have guillotine threats here, and we capture the shoulders. From here, I post on my training partner's arm, I step to the inside, and I'm pushing that arm so the arm remains trapped. As I spin around the corner, you notice my leg starts translating across my training partner's body. I open up to the seatbelt. I lock my figure of four. Now I have the one-arm garrote, or of course, rear naked strangle, while my training partner only has one arm to defend.